Hello and welcome back to Design Matters TV. I'm preparing to make some new quilts, and for that I'm starting to gather together some fabrics, and you can see here that I'm working with some of my hand-dyed cottons, and I'm beginning to create some motif designs and some pattern designs on them. And I'm working at the moment just creating a wide palette of fabrics that then I'll be able to look to when I'm ready to make a quilt, and I'll be able to chop up. So I haven't got a big plan of action in mind as such, but I'm just experimenting and, as I say, creating a palette of fabrics that then I can dip into as I'm working on these new quilts. Now, if you're a regular viewer, you will perhaps recognise this technique that I'm using today. It's a linear monoprint technique, and it's one of my favourites. And you'll have seen on a past show how easy it was to use this method to create designs on paper. And today I want to show you how you can transfer that to working on fabric with just a few little tweaks and tips to make sure that you get the best results you can. So, as I say, it's a monoprinting technique, and we're working onto fabric with fabric paint. Now, because it's a fabric paint, you can just check on the bottle and make sure what fabrics it's suitable for, but on the whole it's going to work on cotton, linen, silk, even synthetic fabrics. So this should work with whatever you've got basically. Just check with the instructions with your specific fabric paint on the fabrics you can use it on and actually how to heat set it. So this one is just an iron set when dry. Now, for the monoprinting process you'll also need a plate, a piece of plastic. Now, traditionally glass would have been used, but that's quite dangerous, especially when you're trying to clean it and wash up at the end of the session. So I would avoid using glass. Instead, you can get a piece of plastic like this, which is actually sold in art shops as a printing plate. But if your art shop doesn't have any, you can go into the DIY store and just get a piece of perspex, and you can get that cut to the size you want. And they probably won't do it, but when you get home, if you just file off the corners and sand off the edges so that it's nice and smooth, then it'd be really safe to handle, and it's going to last you for ages and ages and ages, so long as you keep it nice and clean. So that's the plate, and you also need a roller, and today I'm just going to use one of these foam sponge decorating rollers. If you've got a printing roller, by all means use it if you've got it, but this is a cheap and cheerful alternative, and it's going to work just fine. We'll need a few other bits of equipment, but I'll introduce those as we go along. It's all very basic, so it's likely you'll have everything to hand. So first things first, let's apply some paint to the plate. So I'm just going to squeeze out a dollop of paint and spread it out with the roller. And because I'm just starting today and the roller's dry, obviously this sponge roller is going to absorb quite a bit of paint. So you can see I was fairly generous with how much I applied in the beginning there. You'll find as you reapply the paint, as you do subsequent prints in the session, that you need to apply much less. There is one key thing with this technique, and it all hinges, the success of your print all hinges on the amount of paint that you apply onto your plate. If you have too little paint, then your prints will be faint. If you have too much paint, then your prints are going to be blurry and smudgy and look a little bit crude. Now I know you're going to say to me, well, how much is enough? And really it varies, and that's a horrible thing to say, but it depends on the paint, it depends on how warm it is in the room, it depends on the fabric that you're printing on, because thin fabrics obviously can't take so much paint. So it's a variable that you have just got to establish for yourself with experience. I can't tell you what's right. Just do a few test prints, and very, very quickly you'll be able to judge just by looking at your plate whether it's too wet or too dry. It's best to err on there being slightly too less paint actually, rather than too much. Now roll the paint onto the plate and make sure that it's nice and evenly applied. Now at this point I will tell you that you can use acrylic paints if you want to. They will work. They do have a tendency to dry a little bit quicker than fabric paint, and that can be problematic just because it doesn't give you enough working time when you're creating your design. So if you're using acrylic paints, work fast, or alternatively add in a fabric medium, and that will slow the drying time, and it'll also mean that the hand of your fabric stays softer once you've printed. So the plate's ready to go, and I've got a piece of fabric here that I'm going to print on. Now it actually is smaller than my plate, but that's not going to be a problem. I can just position that over the plate, and what I need to make sure of is that I don't apply any pressure. I'm not pressing down on that fabric, I've just floated it onto the surface there with a feather light touch. The lightest you can put it down, the better. And I'm just going to tape it to the table surface. You don't want it to be moving at all. So just put it under a slight bit of tension there. Okay, now the next thing we're going to need is just a basic piece of paper. Some copy paper is going to be fine. And I'm going to spritz this with a little bit of temporary spray adhesive. Again, just a light amount. The only reason you need to do that is to stop it moving around on the back of the fabric. So I can just pop that into position now. Again, no pressure. It's so tempting, isn't it, to press down and push that into position. If you do that, you'll get fingerprints on your fabric and they will have to be part of your design. Now the point of the paper is so that you can see where you've been. Now I'm going to print with a simple mark making tool, and it's a biro. And I'm using a biro because it gives me a nice fine mark, and also it obviously writes, so again I can see where I've been. If you were to just use the wrong end of a paintbrush or a stick or something, it'll make the mark that you want to make, but you can't see where you've been and you'll lose track. It's really difficult. So just use a biro, and then we're going to just do some really simple, I'll do the half circles, which is a motif I've been using in my quilting. So I know that this printed fabric will coordinate with other things I've already been working on. Now I'm pressing down with a fairly firm, even pressure. Now again, this is one of the variables that you're going to have to take into account. If you press lightly, you'll get a light, faint mark. If you press more firmly, then you're forcing that fabric that's underneath here to pick up more paint off that surface. So again, what I would suggest to you is that you do some simple pattern experiments like this. What else could we do? We could just do some nice little drawn leaf shapes. And by just doing a simple sampler fabric first, before you even get into doing anything a bit more resolved, you'll just help to get a feel for the pressure, the amount of paint, how long you've got in terms of working time. If you take too long over this, what's going to happen is the fabric's just going to stick to the plate and you're going to have to wash it off in the sink, which is obviously annoying. So you need to work fairly quickly. And what can we do? The temptation is to write some text, and if you do write some text, you have to write it in reverse. So I would just either practice your backwards writing. There we go. Print. We'll see if I've got all those letters the right way around. If you just write like that, obviously as you peel your fabric back, everything's in mirror image, so you need to bear that in mind. So let's just whip that paper out of the way, and we can see how this first one has worked. There we go. I think that's actually a pretty good example. Now you can see that if I just move the plate away, there is a bit of paint still on there, and it looks like you might be able to take another print, and if you're really quick you can test, and sometimes you'll get a second print, but not always. Can be worth trying it if you're tempted to. But if we have a look at this first one, you'll see that we've got nice linear marks and a little bit of background noise. Now that background noise obviously happens as you're pressing down. You get maximum contact in the line where you're drawing, but you also get a little bit of contact either side of that line. You get this stuff called noise happening around the printed lines, and that really gives it the quality of being a print, and something that you'll never eradicate with this technique, and something that you should just embrace as being part of the characteristic of this method. But I'm quite satisfied there that the amount of paint was just right. Any less and these marks would have been too faint. and any more and it would just look smudgy. Now I can set this one to one side. What you'll find is that because there's hardly any paint really on there, they dry ever so fast, and once they are dry you can, well with this particular paint, just iron fix that, just heat set it and it can be ready to be used, and it's fully washable. So I can just pop that to one side. I'm really glad I'm in the studio today and not having to go out anywhere, because it is throwing it down with torrential rain. It's one of those days when you can get inside and get warm and put the lights on and get creative and just be glad you haven't got to go anywhere, go to the shops or, you know, go to the office or something. Let me show you some other examples that I've been working on. That method is just the same for any of these that I'm going to show you. So very simply, ink up your plate with paint. I call it inking up, but I'm using fabric paint with a nice thin even layer. Lay your fabric on, taping it down to hold it taut, piece of paper on with a touch of spray adhesive if you've got it to stop it fidgeting. It helps you to avoid the temptation to hold it in place. If you hold it in place, I can't tell you how often you just get those two fingerprints where you're trying to keep everything steady. Let's bring in some of the other examples I've been doing. And you can see, I know this is a rather odd subject matter, and if you've been following DMTV for a while, you'll know that I've been working with the idea of birds and cages. So these are some swallow monoprints that I've done. And I'm showing you these for two reasons. The first, because I hope you'll just be interested to see how I'm applying it to my own work. And then secondly, for a technical reason. So first off, let me just explain to you exactly how these were done. So first off, in my sketchbook, I've done a drawing of the swallow, and it was a pencil drawing. And what I've done is taken that drawing to the photocopier, and I've copied it just in black and white. But all I've done is I've just turned up the contrast a little bit so I get a nice dark graphic copy. And then this was the paper that I laid over. So I've got a plate, fabric, and this was the piece of paper that I laid over the top. As you can see, if you look closely, can you see there's blue biro over this? So all I did to get the bird design, instead of drawing freehand a pattern design, I just traced over everywhere I needed to be dark. I put lines in, and of course those translated onto the fabric then when I peeled it back. So if you're less than confident with drawing, or if you need something to be a copy pretty much of another drawing you've already done, or you can do this with photocopying a photograph. If there's something you want to do that you've got a photo of, make a photocopy of it, use that as your drawing guide if you like. This is a great technique to ensure that the design you get on your fabric is the right size, you've got the proportions right, and it just looks how you want it to do. It's kind of a cheat, but I think it's a legitimate one, especially if you've done the drawing yourself. I think you can get away with it. So you can see here I've got two versions, and all I've done is flipped the photocopy, and in one I've mirrored it and the other one is facing to the other side. But just looking at these with technical head on in mind, you'll see that this one on the left is a much fainter print compared to this one on the right, and I would say of the two, this one is by far the most successful as far as I'm concerned, because the quality of line, the clarity of the mark is much greater. Whereas here on this right hand one, although the image itself has got a bit more oomph and a bit more welly because the black areas are blacker, I think it's actually too much paint and it's made the image be a little bit blurry. Can you see here the profile of his head and beak is somewhat lost into that area of background noise? Remember I said either side of the line you draw you'll get this little bit of background noise happening. Well here, because I had slightly too much paint on the plate, I've got too much of that background noise, and it's meant I've just lost the definition of his beak here. All is not lost though, and I will redeem this one. What I will do is, once I've done the stitching, is just add a little bit of white fabric paint and just knock that back, and it'll be just as effective then as this one. But you can compare the two quite directly there, can't you? And if I tell you the difference in the amount of paint is barely anything, just slightly more paint on this one than on this one. So it just bears out the fact that you've got to experiment and you've got to sample. And if the first one isn't perfect, do persevere and try a different one. Try slightly less paint or slightly more, and sooner or later you'll hit upon it and it'll be perfect. So these dry obviously, and I've heat set these, and they're going to be stitched together, and they'll actually both go together to be one piece of work. So I'm quite excited to crack on with that one. Now let me just bring in this print here. When I started out using this technique with this set of work in mind, I did quite a lot of drawings of cages, just because, I hope you'll agree, this method that creates such a linear design suits something like a cage, if you're thinking of a wire cage and all of its bars, and I thought it would be perfect. And this is done using acrylic paint actually, and the fabric is a little bit stiffened because of that. I think with hindsight, really, I should have done it with a fabric paint, so just do bear that in mind. And you can see in this particular one that I have got more of this background noise, and if you find that to be distracting, you can paint it out. But another option is to treat this fabric as though you're doing a very contemporary broderie purse, and that is to cut it out and applique it to another background. So I've done that with this piece here. So you can see the cage on this panel that I've stitched. You can tell it's done with exactly the same technique onto exactly the same fabric, just a piece of calico cotton. But what I've done, once it was dry and set, just cut it out and I've bonded it onto a background. So that's another way that you can use your monoprinted motifs if you don't want to keep them as a whole piece of fabric. Now with everything set up and the storm raging outside, it seems a shame not to carry on and make the most of it and do some more prints. Now although I've been talking, because this fabric paint doesn't dry that quickly, I can just carry on without needing to wash the plate. I'll just add a little bit more paint to the surface, and using the roller I can spray it about. Now because I'm just printing with black paint today, and if you were printing, you know, one after the other, there's absolutely no need to wash the plate. The only time I would want to do that mid-session is if I was changing colour quite radically. If I obviously wanted to print with a pale colour now, I'd need to make sure I got all of that black off, else it's just going to spoil whatever the new colour was. But otherwise, just carry on. Now, as I say, you will be able to judge, often just by looking down at a low angle, about how much paint you've got on and whether it's enough. You can kind of just see by how reflective it is and by the sheen that it has. And it should have a sort of surface of orange peel, if you like, and a slight rasping sound when you roll the paint. If the paint is very slick, you've got way too much and you'll just end up with a horrible messy print. Try and keep it nice and even as well. That looks okay to me. Right. Now I've got a piece of fabric here, which again is larger than the plate, but that's okay because I want to print just part of this fabric. This technique will work even if you were printing a really big whole cloth quilt. You could just print it in sections by moving your fabric over your inked up plate. So I'm going to float the fabric over the plate, laying it down very carefully, and I just want to print onto this lower section. So I will tape it to the table as before, again just to stop the fabric moving at all. So I'm just putting it under a slight bit of tension as I'm taping it down. Now again, going to need a piece of paper to show where I've been, so I'll just spritz this with a bit of spray adhesive and again float that over the top. The key word is float, you know, you just don't want to be pressing down until you're ready to make that mark. Now for this one, I've been looking back to the idea of working with hedges and thorns, and I've got my sketchbook out here, and that can be really helpful if you're not drawing onto the back of a photocopy. You know, you need to have some kind of guidance. So here I'm going to just be referencing these photographs that I took of hedges, and they'll help guide me in the types of marks that I'm going to make. So I'm not actually drawing this very photograph, but it'll just help me give the character and the quality of the marks. So I can just work with that to one side, and you might find that's useful as well while you're working. So let's start by doing some sort of quite strong verticals. Again, because it's the paint's there and it's drying all the time, you need to work at a fairly rapid pace. So you need to do your thinking before you start, really. So those are some nice strong verticals, and if I look back to my reference photo, I can see I've got lots of vertical lines, and then I've got a block of heavier tone where the hedge is denser and there's more crisscrossing. So I can start to make more of those marks here. Now I appreciate as I'm doing this that my drawing looks horrible because it's done with a biro onto a piece of copy paper, and these marks just don't look pleasing at all, do they? But you have to have confidence that the printed mark will be lovely. We're not making the drawing here. This piece of paper will probably just get thrown away. It's the print that we're working towards. So this doesn't look promising, but hopefully the print will look much better. So I think we need to add some extra diagonal ones, and I'm going to start putting the idea that they're thorny. So I'm just drawing them in a fairly abstracted way, just suggesting that there's thorns. Probably just need a couple more. Right. As you can see, it's quite a quick technique, so should the worst thing happen and it not be very good, don't worry about it. It only takes a couple of minutes to try it again and do another one. So we can peel that off. Now should you find that this print is a masterpiece and the marks are in just the right place, keep this as a pattern. You can always trace over it and do another print. Just use a different coloured pen and you can make repeated motifs. So let's take the tape off and see what we've got. This is always the exciting moment, isn't it? Let's peel this back and reveal. Oh, the print's much nicer than the biro drawing. Let's move the plate to one side and have a look at this. There we go. I'm quite happy with that. I think the way that the line picks up on the paint and transfers it to the fabric, I think is so exciting, and that is going to look really nice when it's dry and when I've pressed it to set it. If I just look back at the sketchbook, I hope that you'll agree that that print, those marks, have got a lot of the character and quality of the original source that I'm working from. So I hope you enjoy putting this technique into practice and getting together some fabrics for your next project. It's quite addictive, and once you've got the paint out and the plate there, you'll be printing onto every bit of fabric you can find, I guarantee. And I hope you'll get great results. So have fun with it, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.